Okay, so anyone who has been around on this channel for a while knows I did a whole M. Night Shyamalan video, and in that video I make the case that M. Night is not only misunderstood and underrated, but one of the best filmmakers of all time. So go and check out that video if you're interested in my full thoughts on the director himself, but this video is going to be me ranking every single M. Night movie. Yes, including these two. I was considering including Stuart Little since he also wrote that film but he didn't direct it, so it didn't make the cut. Also, I considered Devil since he storied it, but again he didn't write or direct it, so it also didn't make the cut. So anyway, you know how rankings go. We're going to go from 15 to 1. We're going to talk about each movie and why they're where they are without spoilers, of course. And I ask all of you to drop your rankings below. I'm sincerely interested in what you guys come up with. I love most of these films, so almost any ranking is honestly valid. So to start mine at 15, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, we have 2010's The Last Airbender. Now, I'm not going to go on too much about this film because there are countless videos already talking about how shit this movie is. You know, it came at a time in Shyamalan's life where he had a few bombs and critical misses, and he was trying to gain the favour back again from audiences, so he decided to adapt a beloved property, and yeah, it just really didn't work out. I don't know what the fuck this guy was thinking trying to cram a whole season of this cartoon into one feature-length movie, but he was on some seriously heavy crack. There's weird musical cues, the acting is horrendous, they don't pronounce anything right, the effects are dog shit, they skip over so much that the film feels disjointed, and honestly half the time it just doesn't make sense. It's a terrible movie and quite obviously the worst thing M. Night has ever created. Next up isn't much better, but to the surprise of absolutely nobody again, we have After Earth. A step up for sure from The Last Airbender in that it's at least coherent and doesn't shit all over a kid's cartoon, but the biggest problem with this movie is that it's just boring as shit. I don't get a single ounce of fun from watching this thing. It's so obvious that M. Night didn't really get much creative control in this despite directing it and help writing it. The story came from Will Smith and the idea came from Will Smith, and Will Smith hired M. Night for this. It's clearly Will Smith's baby. And I mean, the opening monologue is cool, the sets are quite pretty, and the concept of the human race long in the future returning to a healed but now vastly more dangerous Earth is kind of interesting. But god damn, Jaden Smith cannot act. Which sucks because the majority of the movie is spent with him. And not only does Jaden suck balls as an actor, Kitai is the worst protagonist in any M. Night movie ever. He's whiny, annoying, uninteresting, actively doesn't listen to his dad when in dangerous situations, which makes no sense for his character because he wants to be just like his dad and would undoubtedly listen to any command from him. And speaking of his dad, Will Smith is at his worst here. He is such a charismatic actor, it's hard to take him seriously as this stoic, militant badass. All of his lines are shouty and he has this weird accent that Will can't even keep up half the time. You know, this film reminds me a lot of the new Adam Driver film 65. They crash land on a humanless Earth and have to travel across the land battling various animals to the other crash site of their ship to get a beacon to go home or whatever. There's a father and a child relationship, and yeah, they're extremely similar concepts, except 65 looks better, has Adam Driver, and also has dinosaurs. So this is essentially a poor man's 65, and 65 ain't even that good itself. It just wastes so much potential. I mean, the idea of creatures that can only see through sensing your fear is cool as fuck, and for some reason, they are the least interesting part of this whole bore fest. So yeah, it's whack as fuck and insane that M. Night agreed to direct this after being hired by Will Smith directly, and the fact that Will Smith thought this was going to spawn a series of films is fucking hilarious. Honestly, the background of this movie is more interesting than the actual movie. It's weirdly got no tension, which M. Night is usually quite fantastic at building. It's one of his core strengths as a director, and also the pacing is atrocious, which again is one of the things that M. Night is usually pretty great at. This movie is like, imagine you're at a party and you can hear the background noise and it's not quite discernible, it's just kind of background noise. Now imagine a whole movie is just that background noise. That's what this film is. It is muddy and blurry and boring and uninteresting, and I just hate it, so yeah, it's at number 14. Okay, so at 13, we have probably the most out-of-place M. Night film, Wide Awake. This is such an odd movie for M. Night Shyamalan to have made, especially considering it came out just 1 year before his breakout movie, The Sixth Sense, but honestly, it isn't as weird for M. Night to have made as people think. I mean, for one, Shyamalan has made a lot of movies in a lot of genres, and also this contains a lot of his typical themes that you find littered throughout his filmography. The ideas of faith are strong here, as they are in Signs and Praying with Anger, Lady in the Water, Knock at the Cabin, and even The Sixth Sense to an extent. Plus, we also deal with parental figures, which is a long-running theme in Shyamalan's career. Also, the setting of a Catholic school is fitting because M. Night actually went to Catholic school, which is probably the reason behind the inclusion of faith in so many of his movies. But even with all that in mind, this just doesn't feel like an M. Night Shyamalan film. But if you didn't know, it's the story of a little boy who attends Catholic school trying to find some sign from God that his grandfather is okay, who recently passed. It's weirdly dark, but with some kind of bright overtones, and actually has a lot of seeds for The Sixth Sense that aren't obvious till you really think about it, but this film generally feels much more like a Chris Columbus film than anything. It's not awful, it's a passable time, but nothing nobody is ever gonna overly attach themselves to. Okay, so next up is Old, and this is such an odd movie. I cannot tell whether it's an atrocity or a stroke of genius. Like, there are some insane shots in this movie that are clearly from the great M. Night Shyamalan that I know. And then there are also just fucking bizarre choices. Like, for one, every performance in this movie is awful, despite the cast being quite honestly overflowing with talent. The concept is definitely cool, and despite all of its weirdness and odd choices, I can't say I don't have a good time with it. I want more of it when it's over. I'm fascinated by it and the world, and I wouldn't dare say it's a good movie, so I'm extremely conflicted on it, but I do kind of enjoy it. I don't think it's bad, I will say that. It's completely inconsistent and bizarre, but I definitely couldn't confidently label it as bad. But I think this film best represents something that is one of the greatest qualities of M. Night, and that's his commitment. No matter what M. Night does, he reaches for the mountains with it. He tries his absolute hardest on every project he makes, and sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes he reaches for something too hard and fumbles it, and sometimes he stumbles into greatness. This film is one where he slightly fumbles it, but is also trying to be the most conceptually ambitious thing he's done, so for that, he gets points. And before we enter our top 10, at 11 we have Lady in the Water, which is a film I have not a lot to say about. It's a film surrounding a mystery that isn't all too well explained, and though technically isn't as convoluted as some of the other concepts Shyamalan has attempted to pull off, he doesn't put across the information nearly as efficiently as he should to make this effective. Bryce Dallas Howard and Paul Giamatti are both giving solid performances, Giamatti especially, but the script isn't giving him much to work with. There are some themes about stories and faith, finding your purpose and such, but the most interesting thread of it all is Shyamalan's take on critics. Though there is a creature in this film that is attempting to kill our protagonist, the critic who has moved into the apartments is by far the biggest antagonist of the story. And I've heard that this takedown of critics is heavy-handed or comes off as too bitter, but I honestly think that that take is kind of ridiculous. It's allowed to be a shallow, one-dimensional look at critics. I mean, movies are just an expression of your worldview or of some kind of thought or emotion that you may have, and oftentimes critics are unfairly harsh to art and people eat it up, but when it's the other way round it comes across as bitter, and I'm not on board with that. I like Shyamalan's perspective on critics here and how they often think they have everything figured out when they don't, or how they often miss the nuance or the interpretation aspect of a film and write it off as empty choices. They can be arrogant and come across as though they hate the very art form they're paid to critique, which, you know, all of this is true. They can often come across in all of these ways, and this is just M. Night's perspective of that. I just think people oftentimes need a reason to hate on Shyamalan because it was a popular thing to do and still is for some reason, and when it's a film so oddly written and undercooked as this, you'd think it'd be easy to find some kind of valid criticism, but most people target the whole critic angle. Which, to be honest, is actually kind of ironic. It's surprised the critics don't like the ugly mirror that M. Night is trying to hold up to them, but you know, the film isn't bad, it's not good. It's just kind of average. It actually has Shyamalan's biggest role aside from his first film, and he does very well in it. He's a decent actor, and I wish he did more with his abilities outside cameos in his own films. So yeah, a perfectly average movie with some interesting ideas and decent performances that could have been pulled off much better. And entering the top 10 is The Happening. So I think a lot of people misconstrue this film, honestly. It's considered one of Shyamalan's worst, and I kinda don't get it too much. People say it's unintentionally funny, and to that I think they're honestly wrong. I think the quirkiness of the line deliveries and the goofiness of some of the suicides are completely intentional. Shyamalan is a director with a good sense of humour, and I think this is definitely a sort of tongue-in-cheek look at his own style and a sort of campy ode to B-movies which were inherently aware of their own ridiculousness. But that's just my reading. I could just be a Shyamalan shill and inhaling copious amounts of copium, but I do think it has a lot of merit as both a semi-satire and thriller. There are some moments which are quite chilling, and there are some clearly intentional moments of levity. Again, this came out at a time where people were turning on Shyamalan, so I think a lot of folks didn't think he was clever enough or good enough to make something like that, so it had to have just been bad, which I don't think it is. I don't think it's that good either, but like Lady in the Water, I think it's just kind of average. But the reputation of this movie precedes it, so people will now go into this hearing it's a bad film and come out with that idea because, as most of you will know, if you go into something thinking it's going to be bad, more than likely you'll have a bad experience. But anybody who thinks it stinks, I mean, I get it. Plus, the marketing at the time surely didn't help, which sold this film as a certified thriller, but I just kind of don't agree that it's a bad film. But also, I don't love this film enough to really debate it. And now at 9, I'd like to say that from now on, I think every film from this point onwards is a good movie, including this unlikely hero praying with anger. So this was M. Night's first ever film. It was independently made, written, directed, produced, and even starring himself. And if you haven't seen it, it's available in full on YouTube. Granted, in this awful quality that you're seeing now, but it's available regardless. It's a film about an Indian American called Dev who gets sent to India to discover his roots. It's the classic story of a guy not being enough of anything to belong anywhere. Dev is too Indian for America, but too American for India, and that conflict is presented really well here. As he grows to understand the customs of his native country, you see him discover how much he is alike with his people. Though not religious, he finds out religion is less about gods and stories, but more about faith and looking for answers in times of confusion and need, which he comes to appreciate and interact with. The look of this film, even in this 240p version, is quite nice, the opening credits especially being beautiful. It features a woman dancing, which I think is interesting because this is in reference to the love interest wanting to be a dancer, but that not aligning with the path set out for her. And I think it's interesting that M. Night would use this image to open the film more than anything else. But I think it's because that's generally the theme of the movie, even if it isn't about her. Yes, there's talk about passion, hate, love, religion, faith, belonging, and tradition, but more than those, the film is about destiny and knowing who you are, discovering of not only yourself, but your path. And at times that means tracing your past. It's a brilliant little character study, and I wish it were more widely available, so if you happen to have a copy of this in HD or have a physical copy, please hit me up. Now I know it's controversial to have this film so high, but honestly I think it deserves it. And next we have Glass, a film my opinion has changed drastically on. The first watch of this film was a sorrowful disappointment. I resented it, especially with the mistreatment of David Dunn in the final act. But on a rewatch, I actually have come to appreciate this film a whole lot more. First of all, I think it's M. Night's most visually gorgeous movie. He was really swinging for the fences in a lot of these shots. Also, the Unbreakable trilogy has been about challenging our ideas of things. The first Unbreakable was challenging our ideas of superheroes and what they can actually look like, and it was a deconstruction of the genre. Split was a challenge of our conception of DID, but also the capabilities of the human condition, pushing the ideas of what DID can do and how that could manifest in a supernatural kind of way. And this movie, Glass, is challenging what we've come to expect from trilogy finales. It's challenging what we expect from superhero showdowns, and most of all, this film isn't about Dunn. That was Unbreakable. This film isn't about Kevin. That's Split. This film is about Mr. Glass. Sam Jackson as this character has got to be one of his best performances, period. He's just so great at this character, and it adds a lot more depth with him returning to this character after having some real comic book movie shit in his locker. And I love the scene of James McAvoy switching from alt to alt. It's extremely impressive from a performance point of view, but it's also fucking hilarious.
We almost got you, bro. Trying to keep him here with this light thing, that's some buttery shit.
The whole breakout scene is tremendous, and it genuinely made me doubt whether these characters were actually super at all. M. Night is a filmmaker that is just bold enough to have 2 movies setting up superheroes in a universe to discredit them entirely in the finale. So yeah, I think this film is quite good. Though I still don't love that third act, I respect what he was trying to do with it. And for anybody claiming they hate this film, I beg you to watch it again and ask yourselves, do you hate this film or do you hate the final act? Which of course is the part that you remember most. It gives you your lasting impression. So yeah, number 8, it's pretty much in the middle. And now we have The Village, which is an infamously controversial Shyamalan film, and I could not for the life of me tell you why. How this film is at all controversial is beyond me. It's such a solid movie. Now, I wasn't alive for the marketing of this film, but from research I heard this soured a lot of people on this film since it heavily advertised the apparent monsters in the film, which aren't actually all too prevalent. They're more so just looming off-screen threats that accompany the actual plot, which is more of a drama and romance film than anything. And though I won't spoil the twist, because if you don't know it yet, well done, go and watch it before it does get spoiled for you, I actually think it works very well. And though I understand some of it doesn't make sense, and a lot of it hinges on the movie not just lying to the characters, but actively deceiving and lying to the audience by creating scenarios and ideas that technically don't really add up all too much. But they don't break continuity, and they aren't impossible ideas to believe could happen, but they are, however, very unlikely, but also I don't really care. I adore this film for what it is and what it's trying to do. I very much think it's a victim of when the film came out, and looking at it in a modern context, it is very efficient. My friend at the They Live by Film podcast, Zach Bryant, said to me that this feels like the film that if they slapped the A24 name on it, people would call it an underrated masterpiece. And I agree. This is again one of the instances where I think Shyamalan's own name is being used against him. Plus, this is probably the best casting crew the man ever worked with. For a start, he had Roger Deakins as his cinematographer, who just gives us the most beautiful autumn look to the film. The cast of Bryce Dallas Howard, Joaquin Phoenix, Adrian Brody, Brendan Gleeson, and even a young Jesse Eisenberg are phenomenal. I think it's definitely a flawed movie, but to say it's one of the man's worst or even a bad film anyway is a complete injustice in my opinion. Also, this has my favourite M. Night cameo, which is so cleverly shot, which I'm not going to show you because it would spoil the twist, but just so you know, I really like it. Okay, so next we have the first M. Night Shyamalan film I ever saw, which is The Visit. Now, the story behind this is quite interesting because after a very long string of studio flops, M. Night took out a loan of $5 million using his home as collateral to make this film as independently as he could without any studio interference. He took back creative control to make a decently low-budget found footage horror film, and it paid off massively. Not only because the film made just under $100 million at the box office against a $5 million budget, but the film was also fantastic and put M. Night back on top. It was a true return to form and gave Shyamalan his confidence back. He bet everything, even his own home, on the success of this movie, and he paid off because this success is what encouraged him to take his own money and put it into his next project, which would be Split, which was even more so financially and critically successful. So the story behind The Visit is quite inspiring, but as I said, the quality of the film is also quite great. If you don't know, basically the film follows two kids on a trip to go and see their grandparents, which they have never met before. Upon arrival, the grandparents seem sweet, but something is definitely off and horror ensues. I think the suspense that Shyamalan crafts here is top notch, maybe his best use of suspense and silence. The twist is a controversial one, but I personally love it. I think it plays well. The mystery is unfolding at a steady pace and it makes you crave the next piece of the puzzle. The third act is thrilling, and I think it's not only one of the more underrated movies in his filmography, but one of the more underrated suspenseful horrors of the 2010s. There's a little bit of comedy, a little bit of camp, a little bit of real horror, and I'm glad this is the film that put M. Night back on the map. And now entering our top 5, we have Split. Now Split is also a little bit controversial, but this time for its use of mental health and how it portrays DID, which is entirely valid if you feel the portrayal is glorification or exaggeration or even offensive. I personally don't feel that way, but I don't suffer from the condition, nor do I personally know anybody who does, so it's not my place and will never be my place to say whether people should be offended from something or not. I'm just going to say that I love how it's portrayed here. Not only does it allow James McAvoy to give an excellent performance how many times over, but it also expanded upon the idea of human capabilities. The theory of, well, if someone with dissociative identity disorder has a personality that is a different gender with a different set of allergies and somehow actually changes biologically, or at least convinces themselves enough that they have changed biologically to assimilate those allergies, to what extent is that possible, and isn't that already a kind of superpower that neurotypicals don't possess? Because it begs the question of people having DID in general. Do they have a superpower by simply creating these separate personalities as defense mechanisms? But besides that, the performances from Anya Taylor-Joy, Haley Lu Richardson and Jessica Sula are phenomenal as the three captees. And though Anya Taylor-Joy is usually the one pointed out and remains in the cast for the following film, Haley Richardson is, in my opinion, given the best performance aside from James McAvoy. Although Betty Buckley as Dr. Fletcher, Kevin's therapist, is also given an all-timer of a performance. The suspense is again crafted so well and the eventual plot twist was so exciting at the time. It's small and contained like The Visit, and I think M. Night is at his best here with a small and contained story, and I think this is one of the best representations of what M. Night can do with this kind of format. It's certainly one of his more rewatchable movies, and honestly most accessible movies. So yeah, it sits comfortably in the top 5. Entering the top 4, however, we now have problems, because these movies honestly fight each other so much over their place. I've changed it about 3 times since writing this video, and it's likely gonna change tomorrow when editing it, but for now at number 4 I'm gonna go with The Sixth Sense. Controversial not to put it in the top 3, I know. This is most people's number 1, and I get it, it's for good reason. This is M. Night's breakout movie, his most well-known movie, and probably his most efficiently executed movie. The twist is one of the most famous twists of all time, and though it's for good reason because it's incredible, I'm sad it's so famous because it's become near impossible to see this film now for the first time and not know. Now don't get me wrong, this film works very well even after knowing the twist, which is a sign of a good one, but experiencing this film without knowing it is truly something else. Haley Joel Osment gives quite possibly one of the best child performances in history. He is absolutely fucking crushing everything in this film, and when he's acting alongside veterans like Bruce Willis and Toni Collette, he holds his own as not just a child actor, but an actor. This film is quotable, memeable, memorable, iconic, and expertly executed. It's a film that you find new clues and new aspects of every single time you see it, and it never gets old, at least to me. I don't have much to say on it more than that. It's hard to find an original opinion that hasn't been repeated and spewed over the past 24 years. It's just that good. Which brings us to the top 3, and entering at our 3rd spot we have M. Night's newest effort, Knock at the Cabin. Now a bit of a cheat here, but I have a whole video on Knock at the Cabin, so go and check that out for my full thoughts, but ever so quickly, I think this film is going to age incredibly. The cast is a big mwah, especially the obvious Dave Bautista, who has again proven himself to not be the best wrestler turned actor, but one of the best actors of his generation, period. This film is based on the book, The Cabin at the End of the World, which is a brilliant book with a sadly terrible ending, and by that I mean the ending is executed awfully, and M. Night changes that ending, and I think he goes for something that's more satisfying. He challenges what we've come to expect from his films, specifically his suspenseful horror films. It's a beautifully shot movie that keeps you on edge the entire time, and I just adore it. It's only got better on rewatches, and I would not be surprised if it finds itself going up to second in the future. But to do that, it has to overtake our number 2, which is Signs, M. Night's take on an alien invasion film, and god fucking damn, this is a good time. I feel like this movie has kind of gotten lost to time because I don't hear people talk about it much, and it's a shame because it's easily one of the best Shyamalan films. This is suspense at its most visceral. There is one singular moment of Joaquin Phoenix's character Meryl going up some stairs to see if the coast is clear, and I was literally holding my breath on edge, terrified for the safety of this layered and beautiful character. This film convinces you that any one of these characters could actually go. We also have Mel Gibson giving a gorgeous performance as a former reverend struggling with maintaining his family and faith after the death of his wife. We also have a young Abigail Breslin and Rory Culkin giving great child performances, which is just something Shyamalan can capture so easily, who himself has a decent, great performance, and he has a good conversation where he pulls out some real emotion from his character as the guy who accidentally killed the mother character. The writing here is so tight and methodical. He manages to put together an alien invasion story that is truly terrifying without actually seeing any aliens besides one quick glance and a 5-minute scene. Again, this is a fairly concise and contained story, pretty much being entirely shot in one location aside from a few scenes. The comedy is on point, the suspense is perfect, the performances are rich, and the themes of faith and whether you see coincidences or miracles makes for an ideologically fascinating movie that works on both the surface and deeper level. The only reason it isn't number 1 is that number 1 can only be one film for me, and that's Unbreakable. Funnily enough, this is also Shyamalan's favourite movie of his own, and I think for good reason. It's such an interesting take on a comic book movie that came out before comic book movies were even really a thing, especially not in the way they are today. It deconstructs the superhero genre in not only film form but comic form. And it also rationalizes the superhero genre conceptually. Much like Praying with Anger, this film is about discovering who you are, your purpose, but does this in a much more metaphorical way through the use of superhuman beings. And these superheroes aren't like Superman, they aren't like Thor, they're grounded in the way of being simple, almost believable. Peeling back the layers of possibilities of the human condition is the thrill of this movie. But easily the most enjoyable aspect is again Samuel L. Jackson as Elijah Price or Mr. Glass, a genius who suffers from osteogenesis imperfecta with a tinge of madness thrown in there. The twist in this film is still to this day my favourite Shyamalan has ever done, and I think is executed so flawlessly. This film is dark and dingy, and there's still clarity in it. It's one of the more visually individual movies the man has ever made. And not only is the cinematography this unique, the visual storytelling is some of the best, especially the use of subtext, second to only maybe The Sixth Sense. So yeah, I think this is a movie that isn't as perfectly put together as some others like Signs or The Sixth Sense, but its roughness is part of its greatness, and that's why it's my number 1. And that's it. That's the list. So if you want to go and see the list outside the video, a link to the Letterboxd version will be in the pinned comment, and again, let me know your rankings. I'm eager to see them. This is possibly my favourite filmmaker, so I can embrace pretty much any ordering of these films. So let me know what you think of this list, let me know what you think of this video. I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible, and whether it's one from the most ambitious and enigmatic director of his generation or not, as always, keep watching movies.